Welcome to Redefine the Circle, a podcast where we discuss all things pitching. I'm Ashley Sunshine, co-owner and head of pitching development at S2 Breakthrough. In this podcast, we're going to highlight topics that focus on how to maximize your pitchers now. We're going to discuss some of the trends that we've seen at S2 Breakthrough and talk about how we use data to create systems and training approaches that are specific to each pitcher. It's so important for us to continue to share this information and facilitate discussion within the pitching community so we can keep evolving as coaches and ultimately grow pitching into something it's never been before. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for joining the quest to redefine the circle. Hi everyone, welcome back to Redefine the Circle. I'm Ashley Sunshine, head of pitching development and co-owner at S2 Breakthrough. This is episode 3, where we're going to be looking at yet another case study of a pitcher here at S2 Breakthrough and how we took her initial assessment results and created a roadmap. And as I mentioned in my episode last week, this particular case study is really about the flexibility of a roadmap and why that's so critical. In this circumstance, the details we're going to go through today, I'm going to really lay out what my game plan was for this pitcher, how I laid a roadmap out, and how the data that came back told me that I had to switch up that game plan, change the roadmap. And I think this is just a really important discussion because I want to make sure it's clear that, it doesn't always pan out the way you think it will. And that's okay. This isn't a matter of like, once you get the assessment results and you lay out what the game plan is, it's set in stone and you can lay it out for the next year. That's not the case because there's so many variables from pitcher to pitcher, whether it's just generally fatigue, stressors, things that are going on in her life, just generally how her body responds to the constraints or the environments that you're building. There's just so many things that you have to watch. And that's really why measuring along the way is critical. So I've said this before in previous episodes. It's so important to make sure that you're not using data just to prove that your strategies or your approaches are right. You have to use the data to just lead the way and help you make your next decision as far as what's the best approach for that athlete. So I think making sure that we understand when we get this initial assessment information, we can lay out these maybe like this is the foundation of your roadmap. This is sort of what I anticipate will go to this and this and this. But whether or not that's a linear process, the time frame in which it takes to get there is all just specific to that individual athlete. And so this circumstance or this particular case study today, I think is just a great example to show when something did not go how I anticipated and just to walk you through some of the moves that I decided to make in order to make sure we weren't letting her data continue to regress. So, okay, let's dive in. This is going to be a high school aged athlete. She started with S2 Breakthrough right at the end of the summer in August of 2021. When she came, she had a pretty, typical assessment. So power was average at best. She movement capacity, also kind of average, was pretty good on the ground. Anterior core was not great. In the air, some breakdowns, but nothing extreme one way or the other. And then when it came to her mobility, I'm actually going to come over here and look at the screen. Mobility, again, nothing extreme, but what you can see is she can struggle to control the pelvis here, anterior, posterior, so didn't know how to move the pelvis back and forth. And then rotation. So thoracic rotation to her dominant side. She was a right-handed pitcher. And then the ability to really create segmentation. So I always say, usually, the overwhelming majority of times, probably at least 95% of the time, that I see a pitcher who has dominant side thoracic rotation limited in the assessment, it shows me that what I can expect when I'm looking at their biomechanics, when I'm looking at their analysis, is that they are in extension. So instead of being in neutral posture and rotating appropriately, they've lost that neutral posture. They're in extension and then they're trying to rotate there. So they're a little bit more rotating from like the lumbopelvic region, which is oftentimes when pitchers, start to experience some discomfort, some back pain, low back pain. They're just rotating from the wrong place. And so as a result, not rotating from the right place, that region of the body, that mid area of the back it starts to get locked down. So I almost always, when I see a mobility assessment like this, I know I'm expecting that she's going to be in hyperextension. But to the extent of when she gets into it, how extreme it is, how it affects the rest of her motion, I don't know those things until I start to dive into the biomechanics. So let's do that. So moving along here, this is the biomechanics analysis that we got for this picture. And a few things here. One, you could just generally see like how much bubbling there is here. And I usually, when I'm giving debriefs, I usually say something like, when the graphs are really smooth, it tells me that there's stability. It doesn't always mean the body is being controlled in the right planes throughout the motion, but there's at least a general sense of stability of the trunk in the motion. And then whenever I see what I'll sometimes refer to as like a lie detector test, there's just so much noise in each of these graphs. It's just showing instability. So remember, the mobility assessment showed that she really was not aware of where her pelvis was in space, how to move it. That really is clear here in her biomechanics analysis as well. You can see just in the pelvis graph, just so much noise in this side of the graph, really in all colors, but particularly like in this sagittal plane and the posture plane here. So couple things. Let me get this all the way back to the beginning. And then what I could see, in addition to all of that noise, and in addition to really not understanding how to load the pelvis, how to use the lower half, it really confirmed what I expected to see. So over here on the right side, you can see she gets into this really extreme dip in this green graph, and we're talking about the chest. And this is the extension through the back. You can even see it here in the avatar. So this is the extension of the back that we're talking about. She accesses it so quickly. So this is really the story here. I'm going to kind of reverse a little bit. A lot of instability in the pelvis, so she's not able to appropriately put tension in the lower half of the body. So her launch strategy is to get into that extension. And so that's really why we're seeing those mobility challenges that we just talked about. And this obviously is going to have a lot of repercussions in her motion. So just, quickly going through this, the purpose of this is not to explain every biomechanics graph, but essentially because she hits that max posture so early, that extension, that as we're continuing to work through, she is top of arm circle neutral and then forward. So if we're talking about creating room for an arm slot to be able to get a sense of rotation, external rotation or forearm supination at layback, like there is no room here. She's in the opposite posture. So really, really compromised posture, sort of like butt behind her, chest is collapsing forward. That arm is just really ripping through, and you can see there's just really poor deceleration through the end of the motion. Not only we can see that in the graphs, you can even see that in the avatar. So kind of moving along here, what I found was interesting though, this is her kinematic sequence. And so to no surprise, we're looking at here pelvis, chest, upper arm, and lower arm. And basically this is rotational acceleration. It really gives us an idea of the timing at which each of these segments is rotating. And it's really important that if we are appropriately getting into good posture and rotating well in the beginning half of the motion, this is measuring the back half of the motion. Let me pull that forward a little bit more. This is measuring the back half of the motion and telling us whether or not that rotational, that segmentation and that rotational acceleration is happening on time. And so we can see right away, just knowing that her peaks and when the pelvis and chest, they're going at the same time, it's the same time as the arm. This is telling me that I should expect to see poor trunk arm timing, which is a concept we talked about quite a bit here in this podcast. And so poor trunk arm timing, but interestingly, despite having really poor posture, a bad arm slot, bad deceleration patterns, her upper arm and lower arm are still decelerating separately from one another. So when I see the arm working like really rigid, essentially, I usually see this blue, this peak in upper arm directly underneath the peak in yellow. The fact that they're separate tells me that usually I'm looking at a pitcher who produces backspin, bullet backspin as her neutral. And that kind of surprised me here because just there's really no indicator that she should be able to do that. So let's go ahead and just kind of get away from the biomechanics for a second. Here's her video. Let me start it from the very beginning. And as I'm scrolling this through, watch how jumpy and unstable she is through that lower half. There's no concept of creating tension. She was really thinking about momentum more than anything. So the feet are all over the place. There's no sense of putting force into the ground. Again, tension through the hips. And so just as we saw in the avatar, she gets into her max extension. You can see this big S curve through the back right away as she gets to the end of this launch phase. So as we expect, if we get her top of the arm circle, posture is getting more and more extreme. And as she lands that full foot gets on the ground, we can see there's no rotation here. She's still collapsed here. Look where she is. She's almost like pronated, meaning forearm down on the ball, because there's no room for that arm slide, which is what we saw in her graph. So we knew that was going to be the case, but this is just a way to obviously confirm and to be able to really communicate that to the pitcher. There's nowhere to go here. Deceleration patterns are really just going to be chest collapse and the arm ripping through. And again, just her ability to really show that the arm still has a sense of segmentation really surprised me. So I'm going to move on over, I think just going right into her ball flight data. This was the day of her assessment on August 2nd. This is what ball flight data looks like as far as her median break. And it really matches. So she's got screw, drop, fast curve, and this is a rise up here. And so interestingly, this fastball, curve, rise, they're about less than an inch. But they do kind of tend to have a tendency to go like bullet backspin. It just surprised me. So I couldn't help but think, okay, if we clean up her trunk control, we get her to understand how to put force in the ground, control that lower half, get in better posture, can that arm action come through and create like some really great backspin? And maybe she's not throwing hard enough yet to throw up in the zone, but she's at least got, good movement on curve, screw. If they have backspin, can we take that approach? If that's her neutral, and that's her neutral despite all of the barriers, again, the timing in which that she's in extension of her posture, the arm slot that she has at layback, the timing, trunk arm timing, like all of these things are anti-backspin, but it still comes through here. I felt really excited. Like if we can just get her in better trunk position, some of this ball flight data could just take off. So I took the normal approach that I really take with a lot of our pitchers. So the details of that approach were specific to her, but the approach was, let's go a lot of overload, particularly in plyos, and then also with softballs when we're talking about, throwing some of these backspin pitches. Let's promote segmentation of the arm action. Let's make sure that we are doing a lot of pause starts, low intensity, all of the concepts that I really talked about in episode 1 and episode 2 of how to get in better trunk positioning. So patterns. I just thought, as always in the roadmap, if we attack patterns with low intensity, with overload, getting in good trunk arm timing by using overload, then let's see how ball flight data organically grows from that. And then we can attack it a little bit more aggressively from there. So I just sort of laid out that very, kind of standard roadmap that I tend to do. And most of the time is really successful for pitchers. So I just want to scroll through here and show you in the fall. Now, obviously it was a fall season, so it's difficult to ever kick off a training program when you're actively in season. Not that, it can't be done, of course, but you're always kind of combating the high intensity nature of playing tournaments every weekend. So it's always just a little bit more of a challenge to make sure that we can't just take a full low intensity approach because she has to be prepared to throw on the weekend. So we just had to keep that balance. But I'm going to walk you through what her data looked like throughout the fall and what story came back to me essentially through that data that I knew we're not on the right. We don't have the right plan here. We're not taking the right approach. So I'm going to continue to scroll. And this was her just velocity trend through the month of August, pretty steady. Again, this is a pitcher who threw mostly, kind of like low velo, high school pitcher, basically low to mid 50s. Every once in a while, maybe jumping up to 56, 57, but for the most part, kind of sitting low to mid 50s. That stayed, pretty neutral through the month of August, which I thought was great. As we continue to move, this is now going to be the month of September and a slow dip, a slow regression or decline in this trend line. And then overall is just seeing so much variability in her pitch type. So if you remember back in, I believe it was the last series, so series 3, like episode 2, and we talked about velo. And one of the first concepts that I really wanted to be clear about was you don't just sit, we're not robots. Pitchers are not robots. They don't just, if they say the max velocity that I've ever hit is 63, they don't just throw 63 every pitch. Like that's ridiculous. They're usually within a 5 mile per hour range. And so that's typical of what we see with all of our athletes here, regardless of, what their max is. Usually whatever their median is, they're about plus or minus 2 to 3 miles per hour within a day, within a training session. And so for this pitcher, you can just start to see there's just so much variability here within a single day. This is one pitch type. This is fastball. So we started to really see there was a fatigue issue here as games started to pick up for her. She was having a lot more fatigue, was not able to really like keep up when we were measuring velo. And in addition to that, she was actively training at low intensity quite a bit. So I didn't know essentially what variable is contributing the most. Is it that I have too much low intensity? I'm trying to work on her patterns, and I know the approaches that work for that. So is it that she's not responding to that? Is it games? I don't know. It's never really that clear. So then as we moved over, and this is October, this is really when the fall season was in full swing. Over here, I have her break data and then her velo data. And I think this is really important. So essentially what the break data by the end of the month was starting to show me is that she was successfully able to start throwing some pitches with decent backspin. We have screwball here that's spinning with like +3 and +1 on rise, but it's kind of irrelevant. So yes, the strategies worked for segmentation, for better trunk arm timing, potentially. Like they were helping her understand her arm action because she was slowing down and being able to feel things more. But when we actually look at her velo, she was tanking. And so there is no way that we can't say it's a positive in her plan that she's throwing +1 and +3 pitches when she has velos that are sitting literally under 50. Like this is a high school level pitcher. This is a severe regression in velo. And again, it's never a single variable, but I knew like I cannot keep this athlete's plan the same. I cannot just show her this data and say, look, you're doing great, because we can't look at any particular data set in a silo. We have to understand the full picture. So it doesn't matter if that screwball or that rise ball are +1, +3 pitches. If you're throwing them literally 48 to 51 miles per hour, they are going to get hammered. So this was just really important. So we thought first thing is first, it's because we don't know how to sort of tease apart these variables. She just finished out her fall season, took a little bit of a break, had a family trip, then it was holiday time. Worked on really just a little bit of a break from a pitching standpoint, and really just focused on strength and conditioning. And what I decided to do was to switch up. I thought I can't keep things the same. I still think attacking patterns for her is critical because she's in such poor posture, because her decel is so poor. I don't want to regress the ball flight data from a break standpoint, but velo is a major problem right now. So this is the approach that I decided to try. Did I know this would work? No, of course not. But I knew that something had to change. And so this is what we went. Redefine the Circle is brought to you by Rapsodo Softball. Whether it's at the plate or in the circle, Rapsodo delivers all the data needed to enhance your player's development and to give us a platform to become more informed and better coaches. Rapsodo pitching is absolutely critical when it comes to maximizing your pitchers. In addition to measuring velocity, pitchers and coaches get a detailed look at all of the ball metrics that influence break: spin rate, spin direction, gyro degree, spin efficiency. Together, these metrics tell a story about a pitcher's data profile. And to grow that profile and ultimately maximize what that pitcher can become, understanding the metrics is a must. Rapsodo not only provides high-level feedback in the moment, but also creates back-end reports so coaches and athletes can visualize and fully understand the entire story and how it's progressing. Rapsodo is such a powerful tool. Instant data, relevant metrics, innovative visuals, and don't forget the in-app slow-mo video that allows pitchers to watch their pitching patterns right alongside the ball flight metrics they yield. Bottom line, Rapsodo is a must-have in the world of player development. See the data, feel the results with Rapsodo's softball technology. This is a little bit of a look at this pitcher's plan in her program. What I decided to do, we usually do a 3-day plan for our pitchers, and I decided to do a 4-day plan with her. Day 1 and day 3 looked like this. It was still really based on some of the old concepts that we had in the fall, and this really started like the first of the year. We were in January 2022 when we really kicked this off. So this was her normal plyo work with a lot of variability if you're looking here. So all of the plyos are about variability because I didn't want to lose this concept of her, her ball flight data. Again, from a break standpoint, I wanted her to really understand where's the arm in space. Let's not get rigid in the arm action. Let's be able to really keep that break and keep that fluidity through the arm. A lot of low intensity. And then what I decided to do is pull her out of throwing all weighted balls. So usually she was sitting, quite a bit in like 8 to 10 ounces in softball. So that's a typical concept or training approach that I take with athletes, is that when they're throwing so much variability with plyos, when they actually go to work on a pitch type for pitch development, we expand on weight variability in plyos and then throw different weighted softballs for that pitch type. So I took all of that away. I'll explain why in a bit, and just kept her at low intensity, spinning these pitches. We were able to measure them on Rapsodo because we just, had her throw from the rubber, throw over top of Rapsodo, but put the net right behind her 9-hole net, right behind Rapsodo. So, she understood the distance was smaller and she was only throwing 75, but we were able to get good reads and make sure spin and break were what we wanted, even though things were at low intensity. So that was day 1 and day 3. And then I'm going to slide across and show you on days 2 and day 4. And before even getting into this, I want to really asterisk here. Before I go shouting to the world that we fed her underload, I want to be really, really clear. There was an episode in series 3 where I talked about the criteria that athletes need to meet in order for us to have a really aggressive plan or an aggressive velo approach, VBT approach from a pitching standpoint in their training program. I talked about, the stability they have to have, what they have to clear in our assessment to know that they're stable enough. This pitcher was not quite there. She was on the edge, so very close. So she certainly was not highly unstable. She had cleaned up a lot of her patterns and the pitching motion was much more stable, but she did not quite reach that criteria. After a discussion with this pitcher and her family about, you're getting to the point where the level at which you are trying to play, your pitching career will likely, it's getting squashed with the velocities that you're at right now. So this is a little bit of an extreme circumstance. So we bent the rules a little bit, knowing very much so that is risky, that she was on board with it and her family was on board with it, and knowing very well that I was not in that system alone with her, meaning we have her full S2 team here. We have her wellness questionnaires, her reports of any arm pain, soreness. Not only was she reporting what her body and her arm felt like just during her training days, but every day we had our whole team just closely monitoring. So the reason why I want to preface that is because, the majority of pitchers that we see come through here, regardless of their age, of their level, how elite they are, the majority of them are not quite prepared to really throw underload at super high intensities. It's too risky and is likely putting them at increased risk of injury. So when in doubt, if you don't feel like you have the right information about that athlete, whether you don't know if she meets the criteria, if she's stable enough outside the motion and inside the motion, you don't have the right team of people around you or the right systems in place to track her arm readiness, to track soreness and pain, then stay away from it, I would say, because it's important that we are not just chasing performance and risking our athletes' health, obviously, physical health from that standpoint. So this was a very extreme circumstance, and we went an avenue that I wouldn't typically go, but I felt like we could do it really carefully. And so we went for it. And so I wanted to preface with that, but let's kind of go into the details now of what it looks like. So what I had her do was kind of start day 2 and day 4, very similar to how she does on day 1 and day 3. And she's going to start with these normal patterns here with her plyos. Still a lot of variability with weights. Everything's normal. Then she took a break and then we switched it. Essentially, now we were going back and forth, starting at low intensity and then high intensity. We're still in plyos, going from typical 7 ounce to underload 5 ounce. She did some run-ins and walk-ins, only very low volume, a lot of rest in between, so closely monitored, but we really ramped up intensity here all the way into fastball. So on these days, essentially, we took a straight up velo approach, high intensity, under load. We fed the fire here. Again, risky, but I thought it was critical for this pitcher to continue on with her pitching career. So this is what we did. We went all the way in, taking a lot of breaks, but going into some 5 ounce at 100%, some from the rubber, some from running. Here are the details. And so we went back and forth. A ton of rest was taken into account. So it's a 4-day plan, but in reality, she kind of spaced them out. So she really was only doing 3. She was just following them, like 3 days a week of training, but you're doing day 1, day 2, day 3. Then you start the next week off, day 4, day 1, day 2. So we made sure she had plenty of rest going into velo days, following velo days. We had to space it out. It was a really carefully executed process and system for her. And I just can't stress that enough. So that's the approach we took. It was like, we are still going to work on segmentation. I pulled away from overload, as I mentioned, on day 1, day 3, when it came to pitch development, because too much of an extreme. If the days in between that, she was training at insane high intensity, I did not want her throwing weighted balls. So everything, basically the 7 ounce itself was enough of overload, because she was also throwing a 5. So kind of going every other session, really low intensity, arm segmentation, posture, trunk control, very pattern-based day. And then velo, feed the fire, use 5 ounces to really speed things up. Make sure that was transferring. So we were monitoring her velos at 5 ounces. We were monitoring her velo at 7 ounces. We were monitoring them round 1. And then when she repeated round 2, was there any change? So again, a lot of measurement and a lot of oversight here. I should say, this pitcher, again, she was not the same pitcher she was in August. She was now in good trunk arm timing. So, had she not been in good trunk arm timing, 5 ounces would have been a terrible idea. But she was more stable in the motion, better decel patterns, and was in good trunk arm timing. So I said she was really close to that criteria, but a little bit short. So, we were really fortunate. She never reported arm pain, never reported any issues with body or arm during this process, and it worked. So let's move over to the side. This is her Velo Graph. So if you look here, this is before the new year. As we start here, just after the new year, her velos were just basically so low. This is really the point that I decided we have to do something. Things are just unraveling. And there was nothing really clear of why that was happening. Like, her patterns looked fine. Her strength and conditioning looked fine. So, what we've learned about this athlete since then is that, she really has a very sensitive central nervous system, essentially. So when she is stressed, fatigue weighs on her heavily. She's just influenced by environmental factors really easily and really drastically. And so there's a reason why we just felt like she's not the normal case and we can't take a normal approach with her. So after this session, this is specifically when I thought I'm going to kick off a new training program for her. And this program here, these are all velocities at her 7 ounce, not with the 5 ounce, of course. And you can see that, while obviously it's not every single pitch on every single day was, the highest she's ever thrown, but we could absolutely start to see that this was influencing her in the right direction. So velo, check. We got her to where we needed to be. And then here, ball flight. So this I just pulled end of February. That last Velo Graph was looking at the months of January and February, because then she was going into the high school season. And here's her ball flight. A little bit of bullet on fast curve, change up not listed here, but then rise screw back at this +3. So we're now seeing this increase. We were able to hold her break data, but get velo to where it needs to be. Would I say that's a success story? I don't know. I think what I would say is that approach worked for her, but we had to then gradually pull her out of that approach because she went into high school season. It was really important that then we shifted her out of that, and we had to make sure she wasn't tanking. So I just slowly pulled those velo sessions away from her or modified them so that I knew that she was prepared to then go into high school season and we weren't just going to see her tank. She lives a little bit further away, even though she is an in-house athlete. We don't get to see her that frequently, but every couple of weeks she comes in, and so far her data has been able to hold at about mid-50s with break data, and that's really all we're watching now. She has an in-season program she's following, and I'm just watching those two variables and making sure that she's able to hold without an approach that's extreme. And so When she comes out of high school season, she's like basically the only pitcher in her team, which, is a whole nother story for a whole nother time of why that's so tough for pitchers. She's going to come out of this high school season with another, 4 to 6 weeks left. And I don't know where we're going to start when she gets back, and we're kind of thinking about the summer season for her. So I don't know, because there is no you can't see the future. And so what I do know is there were approaches that did work for her. And so to the extent where things really unravel for her in these next, 4 to 6 weeks in the high school season, and then she comes back, it's not going to be the same game plan, because we can't just hammer her with super high intensity while she's also now in season in the summer. It's complicated. And I want to really stress that it's I don't want to feel as if I'm coming on all of these episodes and just and now we waved our magic wand and everything was perfect. It is complicated. So yes, this worked. She's been able to hold steady. Will she hold steady for the remainder of the season? I don't know. And if she does not, and if she starts to regress, I do know that I can't take the exact same approach, because it's no longer off season. It's in season for summer. And so we're going to have to go to the drawing board again, go to the whiteboard. And that's what we do. I make jokes all the time. I think of myself as the Dr. House of pitching, just trying to look at all of the variables that are here at play and how to make sure that I'm not missing something in the story. That's about that athlete. It's about her training response. It's about the constraints I'm building, about the time of year she's in. It's about workload management. All of those things are constantly swirling in my brain and my head when I'm designing these programs. And so to be determined, when she gets back, we'll see what things look like. And then, maybe that case study will be back on another episode here. So hopefully that was an informative and helpful discussion just for all of you to listen to and just kind of wrap your brain around, some of the things that we experience here when things are not going well, the things we consider when we make a change and redesign programs. I know I gave a really big, was really shouting about the underload approach that I took. I think it's so important. I can't stress it enough. I want to make sure this doesn't come across as when you need to chase velo, go for underload. It was really a specific circumstance. But the real summary that I want to come across here is that the data is in charge. It tells you whether or not something's working or not. So if you're out there, you're a pitcher or a parent of a pitcher or a coach, and you are constantly designing programs or training roadmaps, but you're never measuring things, there is no way to know if that roadmap is working. And it doesn't matter if it has worked for 9 pitchers out of 10, because there might be that one pitcher, like I just showed you, where the approach that typically is so effective doesn't work for whatever reason. But the only way you'll know that is if you measure it. So let the data lead you. Let it, again, not be in charge of just showing you you're right, but just be open-minded and neutral and be willing to say, if something's wrong, if you have a new athlete and her velo's tanking, I get it. No one wants to be in that position. Welcome to S2 Breakthrough. In these first 3 months, your velo has tanked. But the conversation is listen, we measure it all. That's why we do what we do, and we will figure out a game plan to help you. So it doesn't mean you're a bad coach. It doesn't mean you're poor, you poorly designed programs. Things just don't always work for every single person. So let the data lead, let it tell you what step needs to be taken next, and then let it really be how you communicate appropriately to the athlete and to the parents, because it's so important when things are not going in the right direction for everyone to understand the data, to really stay on board to come out of that period of time. So again, hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something here today. As always, between this week and next week, keep questing on to redefine the circle. We will look at yet another case study next week, and we're going to wrap up in just a few more episodes here, Series 4, looking at how we build training roadmaps here at S2 Breakthrough. See you next week, everyone. Thanks. Thanks for listening to today's episode. I'd love to connect and hear your feedback. You can contact me directly at ashley@s2breakthrough.com. If you're listening, you can leave us a review, or if you're watching, go ahead and leave a comment below. Also, be sure to follow S2 Breakthrough on all of our social media channels and subscribe to Stream S2 to find all things player development. Until next time, quest on.